Welcome to the Digital Forester Podcast, where we talk to foresters about how they are using digital technologies in their day-to-day forestry work. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Digital Forester Podcast. We're coming into October, which is crazy to believe we're already there. But today, it's my privilege to introduce you to Gaetan Pelletier. He's the executive director at the Northern Hardwoods Research Institute out of Edmundston, New Brunswick. Edmundston. Yes. So for us Canadians who often drive, I guess, east coast, Edmundston is often probably maybe not the place you want to be recognized exclusively for, but a good stop for at least our Ontarians to pit stop there as we keep going out east. But I've had the privilege to stop in and chat with Gaetan at his institute, and I think we're going to have a great talk today. So Gaetan, how are you doing today?
Doing great this afternoon. Good afternoon.
Awesome. So as with the number one question I always ask people is, share with us your journey in forestry, because I know a little bit of it, but I don't think I know it all. So I'm equally curious to know that journey from when you're a little guy. You know, what triggered it? Was it family being in the business of forestry, or was it some trigger event? But yeah, give us the rundown of your background to date.
Yeah, I grew up pretty well in the woods, and then we had a homestead, and father had a woodlot, and very familiar with what you do in the woods, and I was pretty good in school, and then I kind of decided to do something professionally to do with the forest, and so my career, my path is a bit unorthodox. So I started with a 3-year program in Quebec, and then I continued my bachelor's degree part-time, and then I started a master's degree, and really my career is about doing things. So I was very fortunate to start with J.D. Irving Limited, my first job, and I stayed there for 28 years, and I did a lot of fun stuff, a lot of interesting things, a lot of R&D, but a lot of developing of practices and best practices and management systems. And my second career, after 28 years, I became the very first director at the Northern Hardwoods Research Institute here, and so this is my 10th year doing that.
Wow, amazing. So for our listeners, this is a gentleman who's had boots on the ground for 28 years, right? And then on to second career. Like, you'll just keep working till the end by the sounds of it, 28 plus 10. So obviously a wealth of knowledge inside your brain from a practical point of view, and maybe connecting reality, research, trying to make it feasible and whatnot. So thinking about your journey in 28 years, just thinking about technology, this podcast is really talking to people about their journey, their experiences, what they've seen. But so before we get into the research side, I'm just curious to know your thoughts when you mentioned, 28 years with J.D. Irving, congratulations on that. It's like, you're what now, 29 years old by the looks of it, right? So you still got many more years to go. But maybe what do you think from the time you started to where we are today, and not going into the research side, what's maybe surprised you the most in terms of how the industry has changed in the context of technology?
And I started when we did not even have a PC at the office, and I had my own Commodore 64 that I brought to work, and we had very limited communications, and no cell phones, of course, and we communicated by radio. So we had a radio for local for the local district, but then we had what we called a main channel, which you could cover from the border of Quebec to Nova Scotia. But any conversation were public; everybody would hear you. So and one day we got a fax machine, and we were super happy that within 15 minutes you could receive one page of text on this machine with glossy thermal paper. And but really it took a while to realize the benefits of digitalization and technology, because there was hardly none. GPS was not readily available back then. It was only a military tool. In the airplanes, we had Low-RAN-C for locating where we were, and but we did things very, very traditionally. And when I started, I was assigned a mentor, a great mentor. But it took years and years before I was able to do things by myself, innovate and create. And so things took time back then, and everything was very, very hands-on. And if you didn't know your forest, if you didn't carry a jackknife in your pocket and a magnifying glass on your cruising vest, you were not made for that type of work. And then things start to happen very, very rapidly. GIS, J.D. Irving Limited, back in 1984, we acquired Esri's license number 0002, and 0001 was the Department of Natural Resources. Very, very infancy, and we
Yeah.
used to take paper maps, put them on those great big digitizing stations, and we would digitize
Yep.
digitize lines and stuff, and everything was on a prime computer, command driven, but you could see where this was going, and we knew it was much more than a convenient way to make maps digital. We started to do experiment with queries and topology and things, and so that I would say that was the first trigger in the early 80s. And then things just rapidly change. And one day we were able to use GPS and very, very big clunky machines that weighed about 20 pounds in a backpack. And you had to have a differential correction for everything. And but we could see the value of digitalizing the value chain right back then.
Right. All right. That's amazing. I'm chuckling because as you're describing some of that history, we probably have some listeners like going like sorry, what's a Commodore 64? Like what's a fax machine? What is that, right? Everything. And I had a Commodore 64, so I'm dating myself as well. But it's totally cool to hear that. And yeah, that lineage of GIS, like GPS, right? Like nowadays, everyone, I don't know, it's taken for granted, if you will. It's in our phones and everything. But to hear that lineage, that at once upon a time there was not these things, and forestry, the business of forestry, still unfolded per se. So thinking about your career in technology, you've obviously dabbled with lots of things, and I agree. I had an undergrad course where I had to digitize, the 4 ticks of the corner of the paper map, then use the puck, and now people are like, why would you do that? Why would you not just use a computer? It's like, yes, ha ha ha. It's like we did have computers back then. They're just maybe different than what they are today. But thinking of technology as a whole, tell us maybe about your role with NHRI, because you're doing a lot of cool research, leading edge research, creating partnerships in the province of New Brunswick. But maybe for our listeners, introduce ourselves to who NHRI is and its mandate and its research priorities today.
Yeah, so the NHRI, we're now into our 10th year, and it's a partnership between private industry and then the government of New Brunswick, government of Canada, and University of Moncton. And we started back in 2012 as an applied research center, which required that we think about the structure quite a bit, because initially people thought it would be like a research chair and a very, very traditional way of doing research. And we knew from the outset that we could not compete with the research done at big institutions, and we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. So we had to be a bit unique. The niche that we found is in making research very applicable, true, very relevant, and turn research into solutions. And don't do research if you don't have a problem to address. We still do a lot of research internally, excuse me, but we leverage partnerships everywhere, and even with the private sector, as you know. So we are a research center that tries to improve the way we manage mixed and hardwood stands in Eastern North America. But it became also very obvious at the outset that we could not transform knowledge into benefits unless we made it digital. So no sense developing silviculture guidebooks, and that forester has to walk around every tree and to make a decision. And we knew everything we did, and all the knowledge we would create or synthesize would have to be transformed into some type of a digital solution. So
Right.
that's why we're very, very on to digital forestry, precision forestry, and digitalization of the value chains.
Yeah, very, very cool. And so you're a great guy to be in that position to answer these types of questions of what do you see when we think about innovation. um, I hate the word disruption personally, but I'll throw it in there. But disruption, digitalization, modernization, etc. What do you see from your seat, the challenge or maybe the barriers to entry for some of these companies? Because I know in past discussions you'll work with some companies that are very, very along in their transformations, if that's the right word, and adopting new technologies, but also quite a few folks on the New Brunswick side that maybe a little bit lagging behind. But also your institute is not just New Brunswick, it's broad per se. But thinking of in that context, what do you see? Is there a pattern between the people bleeding or leading the trail versus maybe people lagging a little bit, or is it just the usual innovation curve where we've got the early adopters, we got the late majority coming online? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that pattern certainly exists. So we see that as being a dominant trend. So there's, like you mentioned, explorers and then early adopters, and then the rest of the pack kind of catches. And while this is happening, the pioneers are looking at something else, and then there's another wave coming. And so certainly that is a reality, and we see it every day. Um, but the forest sector is very particular, and uh, one of the biggest benefit I found leaving my old job and coming here is that we started to work with technology firms and technology institutions, and also other sectors like agriculture. And very, very quick, I kind of said, holy jeepers, like the other sectors are further along in advancements in a bunch of features. Well, digitalization is one of them, but also the culture. Like many other sectors are driven by how can we make things happen without relying on a ton of people, because that pipeline of people is not there anymore. And I find forestry is kind of lagging amongst all sectors. A good example, in the 1990s, the Scandinavians developed harvesters and harvesting heads, and actually earlier than that, probably the late 80s. And then the technology of onboard computers that would automatically, by measuring the tree, predict taper and then decide what the optimal cut would be way before you went there. And then we saw a value chain component to where the mills could now prepare the matrices that go into those algorithms, and the machine will optimize
Mm-hmm.
for value or optimize to order. Well, that was 3 decades ago. And when we go around the forest sector, it's really, really amazing how those concepts are not fully mainstream and fully adopted.
Why do you think that is?
I think part of it is our sector often deals with segments. So it's a very few handful of companies, forest product companies, that actually are involved in every aspect of the chain. There's still a lot of contracts to deliver products to the mill, and quote unquote, we don't care how you get there. There's legal blockages with how you deal with contractors, and there's still a lot of cases where the receiver of the products does not know what's going on, and then you leave it to the contractor. So rather than having a very unified front like there was in Scandinavia, where everybody took charge and the development was really rocket fast, here there's still some cases where the firm who buys the wood, uses it, transforms it, doesn't know what's going on inside the chain. So I think that's
Yeah.
the big part of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's interesting to say that because, as you know, I've been involved in this space for just a few years, maybe, and definitely one can be frustrated in the pace of change. And for me, it's like it's interesting to say that because I'll throw this out there and curious to know your thoughts. For me, often there's confusion around invention versus innovation, and for me, innovation has always been just look at something and do it faster. It's not necessarily about inventing, a brand new iPhone or something, but if you look at innovation, just even on the process side, if it takes this much time to do X, could we do it in a shorter period of time? And whether that's processes, technology, however you solve that problem, that in itself is innovation. I think when I look at the forestry landscape, going on, I guess, probably dating myself past 2 decades now, I'm not sure that fire is lit under the right person to incentivize them, if that's the right word, to embrace innovation. And it's something I've always just trying to figure out, because certainly today, as we look at the adoption of technology, I kind of joke with foresters, they don't want to be the first ones out of the gate, but they sure as heck don't want to be the last ones either. And so right now we're seeing with the technology, and I don't know if you see it on your side as well, that there's a lot of people coming to the table asking for help, wanting to learn more on how to do this. And whereas before you had to justify a lot of this, now it's kind of like, yeah, Gaetan. It's like, yeah, I trust you. It's like, yeah, let's just go. And I'm curious to know, we often hear relationships are key in forestry. Do you think that's still the case when you think about this technology? That's still a relationship based industry, or do you think that's evolving into something more where there are forestry companies, foresters are buying differently?
I think the relationship concept is still very strong out there, but I think the good news is everybody knows a value proposition now, and everybody knows the magnitude of the benefits that we can get. So I see it changing for the better. But yeah, unfortunately, you cannot just do some math and show the value proposition and then you have a buy-in. I know people like you and your company, sometimes you scratch your heads of why, like everybody agreed, and why are we not implementing this tool across the value chain? And
Yeah,
that,
absolutely.
that's changing, and the next generation, like the people like me, are leaving, and then there's a vacuum, and there's new people coming in. Well, the new generation, they don't have the benefit of knowing the forest as well as we did. The forestry schools went from 5-year programs with 140 credits, and now to 4-year programs with 120, and I see we're lodged on campus here, so we see the forestry students come and go, but they don't leave with a good understanding of the profession. And then that is paired also with those mentors that I talked about earlier. Well, they're not there anymore. So
That's a
so
good
that
point.
forces the adoption of technology, I think. So that is a good a good thing about that. So
Yeah, absolutely. And very, very cool there. So yeah, I was trying to think when you, just for our listeners, when you mentioned you're embedded on campus, that's Université de
Moncton,
Moncton. I
the
was always,
Edmundston campus, yeah,
yeah, I was going to Université de Edmundston. I'm like, no, that doesn't sound right. I was like,
yeah.
Edmundston, yeah. So Université de Moncton, Edmundston campus, yeah. So embedded there, and yeah, I remember visiting there several summers ago. So on those themes right now, thinking of technology, Lidar, it's the hot topic button for everybody, whether you're space-based with NASA Jedi, whether you're then coming to airborne, single photon Lidar, Geiger mode, linear mode. The language even itself has changed over the last couple of years. But obviously New Brunswick has, well, maybe not for our listeners, but New Brunswick has been active in wall-to-wall, province-wide Lidar mapping. You've been involved in that Lidar space. Tell me a little bit about the past work you're doing and how that's positioning your current research focuses with industry.
Yeah, that's a great way to talk about this this curve, this pathway that we talked about earlier, pioneers and early adopters, and then followers. And so in New Brunswick, nobody will deny that Lidar is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and everybody's on board. Everybody's on board, and this started back in 2013, but working off some of the findings that you came up with in your work at the Romeo Mallet Forest, and how you came up to develop enhanced forest inventory variables and whatnot. So everybody's fully on board. But now the pioneers are saying, okay, well, we're not going to be able to do another round of LiDAR, airborne LiDAR acquisitions, like not in today's economy. And once we recover from this pandemic, maybe there's going to be money to fly again. But so there's people looking at spaceborne LiDAR. So we got all this distribution out there, and there's folks that look now at how can we live without relying on LiDAR too much. And there's folks looking at using satellites like Sentinel-2 to complement, to fuse information with the existing LiDAR. And at the Northern Hardwoods Research Institute, at first we wanted to be in that circle of influencers and pioneers and early adopters, and because we are consumers of inventory, of digital inventories. But it became clear that maybe we wanted to ramp up our involvement a little bit and get active into working with remote sensing data. And so we started to experiment with LiDARs on drones. As early as 2015, we were capturing 1,500 points per square meter with
Wow.
With a Velodyne LiDAR on a cinema drone type of thing. And so we're involved, and what we try to do is to help the mass steer in one direction. So we will do all kinds of work with precision forest inventory, and then we keep people informed. Hopefully somebody or collectively, with everything that everybody knows, somebody will say, hey, that's great, let's go there. So that's really our role, and we're not at all trying to displace the big players in that ecosystem.
Yeah.
Our role is to do crazy stuff while other people do productive mainstream stuff. Like we explore, and then we make people aware of what it is that we're finding.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the piece I think when I think of NHRI, you guys do fantastic applied research, and while other universities, bigger institutions may do that, you're obviously closest to boots on the ground in that parts of the world, and you guys have pumped out some great research pieces. Do you think this would be a general statement or a valid statement? All forestry companies in your neck of the woods, thinking of New Brunswick, there have embraced LiDAR? Because when I think of some of them, I talk with, and I won't name them, they may not be fully on board, and maybe more for that accuracy and precision, what they expect isn't quite there. Do you think there's some companies out there that may not have fully bought on, beyond the point that it was free, flown by the province, created by the province, the EFI there on the pixel basis? Do you think there's a couple laggers? Because JD Irving's obviously the opposite. They've gone, to the full extreme of embracing it completely for individual tree work and species work. But some of the other players, do you think there's still some work to be done?
Yeah, there is. So you mentioned the other extreme. We're very privileged to have real front runners here that kind of drive the R&D agenda. But yes, people or companies and firms we deal with. I had a call a year ago from one that said, well, DNR gave us the LiDAR derived enhanced forest inventories on a hard drive, a big hard drive, but how can we open it? How can we look at it, and how can we use it? And they asked us if we could help them with workflows and things like that. But those companies normally are not as invested, and I think not that I say it in a negative way, but sometimes they'll be waiting for the dust to settle, and everything will be ironed out, so they don't have to put the effort in those
Right.
processes, like enhanced forest inventories. And a lot of it has to do with size of the firms and their vision. So it's not negative in any way, but it does create this distribution of adopters that goes from fully adopting and then leading development to those who just wait till everything is cooked and ready. So
Yeah, absolutely. And for our listeners, DNR's Department of Natural Resources in New Brunswick. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, Gaetan, because part of me has always wondered, is it a capacity building issue? Some of these companies that don't have the capacity in people and technology, right? And even though they may be super excited watching the world unfold and wanting to be part of it, at times I wonder if it really is just I don't have the manpower, woman power. I don't have the tools, the technology. I don't have the network to collaborate. So that's something I've always been curious about. Obviously, living
yeah,
in the space of technology and what some of those barriers are to really achieving success. Because my philosophy, and I've shared it with a lot of people, and even yourself in the past, is the best successes are when you have the subject matter expert from the forestry side at the table, and then the other partners. So whether it's a technology provider or a government partner, but when you really have those SMEs, not small, medium enterprises, but subject matter experts, it's amazing what you can do because it grounds what you're doing in, as you said at the start of this podcast, in the real world, in utility and applicable things. So that's something I've always been wrestling with. I'm going to take us over to a different theme. You and I sat in a big data AI workshop, NRCan, Natural Resources Canada, ran it. I believe Canadian Forest Service, Canadian Wood Fiber Center, some of the usual players there. And this is probably now, I guess, actually, it was right before the pandemic struck. I think it was
it
February
was my
2020,
my
right?
my last public event before the
Yeah.
pandemic. Yeah,
Yeah. Now that you mentioned, I remember that because I remember it's like, yeah, that was probably my last flight out east there. But at that, they've published things about, big data, predictive analytics, AI, and all that jazz. Where's the state of the art from your seat and looking at New Brunswick and other jurisdictions in Quebec as well and stuff? What are your thoughts on this whole AI thing? Is it legitimate? Is it a too broad of a term that needs to be unpacked into specific parts of the business of forestry? What are your thoughts on AI and what it brings?
yeah. I'm the last thing from a believer of solutions that come out of a black box or those old cue balls that you shook and you had an answer coming in the window to
Yeah.
everything. And I always I really appreciate all the work that goes in there and all the results, but I need to open the hood and make sure the wires are not crossed, and I need to make sure it's repeatable and it's solid. And I'm really bad about that. I really slow down work sessions with developers and AI people because no, wait, like, why is that image still useful across all of New Brunswick, that satellite imagery, while the leaves are red in Edmundston and they're still green in Moncton? And you're building a model from AI that figures out species from reflectance values. Explain it anyway. And so that's the way I work. But I do see a big role in AI in general, but really deep learning is what I'm really interested in lately. And we formed a partnership with a IT firm that specializes in AI, and they're really good at it. But alone, they were not going anywhere. And we work with them on a daily basis, and we provide the forestry input. So if we build a model to come up with a certain inventory variable from remote sensing, well, we will build the training data. And that's what I learned is the training data is about everything. And you can build an AI model in ArcGIS Pro using their random forest routine. But the key is great training data that relates to your problem. So AI folks, statisticians, machine learning experts rarely can do that. So the pairing within a team that develops solutions using AI, but the pairing with real users that will bring relevance to the training data, that's the key to everything.
Yeah, absolutely. We've heard it time and time again in the AI space, and then that brings in machine learning, and then deep learning, a subset of the machine learning side or specialized subset there, which ironically for me is when I look at deep learning, right, you're dealing with neural networks, and I think back to my graduate days where we were coding that in like comp sci courses, and it was more to recognize letters on mail that you sent, and in hindsight I'm like, man, if I just stuck with that, it's like maybe I'd be on my 60-foot yacht right now. I'm saying that in jest. People who know me know I don't roll that way. I'm not that fancy. But thinking of the AI side of things, absolutely training data is key. I often say in layman's term, if you don't see it, you're never going to predict it, and that's where that library is critical. And I think on the research side, there's always questions. How big does a library need to be to actually for it to work? But maybe I believe you guys have some project, NHRI has some projects as a function from that workshop. Can you share maybe a little bit about the state of the art, what industry is driving in that context of that AI space?
Yeah, so from that workshop, what resonated was there's a big need. There's lots of interest from all the sectors that were involved in that workshop, and all the way from forest products firms to IT firms, and so that really resounded, and right down to a list of priorities. And then NRCan launched a nationwide call for proposals for 3-year projects, and NHRI submitted one under that theme, value chain digitalization. And then we were successful. We got funded, so we got 3 years funding to conduct what we call Digital Timberlands 2020. And what it is for us, it's try to focus on the upstream portion of the value chain, to work with all players and try to develop, try to perfect a concept. And so what we're doing is we start with what we know already from precision forest inventories. And then we work with that, and then we go to the woods. We set up 1 hectare frames, 100 meters by 100 meters, for which we know inventory from the EFIs. But then we super inventory that frame. We put 9 plots in 1 hectare, and we characterize the forest, and then we isolate sample trees that will be harvested and with destructive sample, and then we will try to relate everything along the chain. So what is it that the harvester produced? How well did it measure the pieces? How well did we improve bucking? Roll it back. What did our inventory in the woods find? And then roll it back even more. What did the remote sensing derived enhanced forest inventories tell us? And then we're looking at, okay, so there's obviously errors everywhere, and there's biases. So we're trying to develop means to fix errors and to improve or remove bias. So that's in essence what our project is. We're putting 100 to 150 of those frames across New Brunswick. Plus, every frame before harvested, we fly with a drone with Lidar. We capture about 2,000 points per square meter. And then, so we're going to try to extract single tree metrics, even down to saw logs on those trees.
Cool.
And again, compare that to what the harvester did, and then come up with optimal bucking patterns, and then measure how close did the harvester get to the optimal, and try to explain why we did it. And those frames, also people walking with mobile lidars, in a backpack, and we collect about 15,000 points per square meter. We're going to use terrestrial lidar at 60,000 points per square meter, and then we're gonna mesh all of that. And really, the big goal is to see where the opportunities are and what do we have to work at to make sure we can digitalize the value chain, because we haven't today.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah, definitely interesting. So for some of our listeners listening, you describe that different types of technologies and whatnot. How are you going about choosing them? Because I suspect a lot of people are listening going like, oh, hey, you're Gaetan talking about, drones. I want one. I don't even know where to start. And he's talking about terrestrial lidar, mobile lidar, and so thinking of the person starting that new digital forester wanting to get into the space. Do you have any pro tips as from lessons learned of, you need to ask at a minimum these 3 questions, otherwise you might get the drone that flies for 5 minutes, not the 45-minute one, or the payload's too heavy and it affects your power. Any pro tips on the field side? Because I'm hearing a theme around heavily applied research on the field and linking it to the harvesters. Any pro tips for those looking to get into that space?
Yeah, find organizations like us who've made all those errors and believe the sales pitch and believe the spec sheets and whatnot. And by all means, if nothing else, we can tell you what to look out for. We can even recommend single equipment. We don't like to make comparisons one company against the other, but we certainly can say, well, gee, if you want to do high density scans and you want to do it on large areas, well, there's two big spheres. You can do the typical RTK GNSS type of approach, or you can use a SLAM, the SLAM alignment technology, and we've tested both, and both have their caveats, and both have their pluses.
So maybe tell me more about that, since I know what you're talking about, but our listeners might be going, what are we talking about, basketball now, like LeBron James, like slam dunk, like unpack that a little bit more for us.
Yeah. So if you're familiar with, well, I know you are, but your listeners that are familiar with aerial lidar scans on airplanes, sometimes multi-engine airplanes flying 8,000 feet. Well, you don't have a strip alignment issue because you cover such a large area with those Regal scanners, and then everything stitches very well from one strip to the other. And you're also at low densities, 6 to 8, maybe 10 points per square meter. And you're interested at point clouds to come up with area-based forest inventories. My 20 meter by 20 meter, I have so much basal area. Here's my percent hardwoods. Here's my pea size. So for that purpose, we don't have an issue that LiDAR technology is mature. The stuff that we're trying to do, we want to go right down to the single tree. Every single tree must have a 3D representation, and we want to make predictions on diameters at different heights and where the branches are. So that needs a very, very high density scan. And unfortunately, the strips are so much tighter together. We're talking maybe 10 meters between paths. So that brings the issue of making strip A and strip B, which collected data on almost the same features, really align. You don't want DBH to be here on one strip and then DBH to be here on another strip. So there's technology around that, and the first technology is just using RTK and GNSS or PPK technology, where the drone with its initial measurement unit, IMU, will take care of that. It knows where it is at all times, and the more money, the better. But generally, they can align strips without too much problem. But there's issues. We just collected some scans in Haliburton in Ontario this spring, and we're still struggling with aligning the strips,
Really?
because
Okay.
we got ghosting on trees. But this is an algorithm thing, so we're going to get around to do it. The other technology is the strips themselves. So this is the SLAM technology. So the strips themselves are what makes them align. So you get full coverage, and then it's triangulation or ranging, I'm not sure, but it doesn't rely on IMU and GPS. It's the relative position of objects from strip to strip, and then it constructs the model that way. It tends to be very reliable. It's very finicky though on parameters and setup and calibration. But the big drawback is you cannot do this for areas bigger than about 5 hectares easily. It gets too big, and then the model gets confused with too much information and try to pull too much at the same time. So if somebody wanted to get into the business of providing aerial scanning at very high densities with drones, we could talk to them and say, okay, if you're thinking of this, here's what we encountered. If you're thinking of the other approach, well, we've encountered something else.
Yeah. So I love it because I get you to explain it. I don't have to explain it. And it's kind of funny. I'm like, SLAM, I should look this up, simultaneous localization and something mapping. I'm trying to look it up on my phone here, but yeah, there we go. There's the buzzword. Yeah, there's lots of players out there. So absolutely. So handheld technology, I think nowadays, if you go into that mining space, SLAM was probably roots in there. I think even CSIRO out of Australia had some early pioneers there, because I remember, again, dating us, the version 1 of the GeoSlam as an example. There's other products, but super cool at the end of the day. Per se. So thinking of that on the drone side, it used to be kind of like that hot topic, and maybe it still is. What's the state of the art on your side? Still visual line of sight needs to be, or in your jurisdiction, can you go beyond visual line of sight and get that extra range? Because as foresters, we're always like, hey, it's a great tool, but I got to be able to see that bird in the sky, and then that constrains its uses. Where's the state of the art in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, so I got to be careful. Our drone pilot is not here, so I tell Pam that she's our drone pilot. She's really good, but we really discovered. We started fly drones in 2013, and we quickly discovered the niche for practical drone application is super narrow, and
okay,
so
interesting.
we use it for proof of concepts mostly, because. Well, I'll give you an example. One of our great financial partners came to us and they said, we would like to map every tree in young plantations, softwood plantations, 3 to 7 years old. And we would like to figure out the heights of those trees and the projection of the base of the crown. And once we have that, then we can initiate that plantation on the yield curve, and then we can think about remedial treatments. And so what, and they said, we want to do this operationally. So the first discussion we had is, we don't think drones are the way to go to scale it up operational. But for the proof of concept, for the development, for the straw dog, nothing better than drone technology. So this fall, when the leaves fall on the trees here, we'll be flying probably 15 to 2,000 points per square meter densities, acquiring that with a drone and a Lidar. But the purpose is, once we have that, we will dummy down the point cloud to the sweet spot at which, what is the minimal amount of points per square meter you need to make those predictions. And if it happens to be in the range of 100 points per square meter, then we'll say, okay, let's go talk to a airborne Lidar acquisition provider, ask them what they need to do to capture 100 points per square meter, because they'll do it so much cheaper, so much faster, so much more quality and integrity. And their answer might be, well, we're going to fly it on a Bell 206 helicopter at 150 feet above canopy at 30 knots. But it's going to cost you 3 times the cost of airborne, but it's going to cost you a fraction of drone. So that's the role we play. And I don't know too many organizations that are able to do that. So tackle those questions with a pragmatic view. So then somebody who's already in that business can look at the best practices and then do that commercially. So
Yeah, no, that's a great point, right? I think you just nailed it on the head. Like best practices, good practices, right? The NHRI, I know, does a lot of research and publications, and even is it monthly, the leaflet?
Quarterly now, yeah. It was monthly, but it became a full-time job for 3 people. So
Yeah, no kidding, no kidding. So Gaetan's team publishes out a quarterly newsletter called the Leaflet. So you can go to their website there if you want access to it. So I guess as we think about, as we start winding down in our conversation, I'm curious to know what gets you excited for the next 1 year, 3 year, and 10 year. Because again, as I said, you're what, 28 years plus 10 years, you got another 48 to go, so you're well positioned here to give us a view into the crystal ball future. But what gets you excited in your seat? Because I think it's unique. You're in that executive director role. You've got the boots on the ground experience. You've seen the world of forestry unfold as some of the technologies today we take for granted are just there. But what gets you excited? 1 year, 3 year, 10 year? What do you think the world looks like?
yeah, so what makes me get up early in the morning and come to work and still not think about retirement is the big challenge we have to bring solutions so the right forest management can be applied in a context where there's fewer knowledgeable foresters in the woods now. And it's not really their fault, because the job demands that you get to the woods in your pickup truck, you talk to the contractor, you solve the supply chain problem, and that's all the time you have for that day. And you don't have a chance to spend half a day walking through a stand and validating treatments and whatnot. It's unfortunate, but it is a reality. So our challenge and what keeps us really going is that how can we develop tools to fix that gap? Empower the forester with technology and information, really, and then answers. So their job now is go there and validate what this software as a service produced. So that's where we're going. And a lot of my colleagues elsewhere at other research institutions, they tend to believe educating people to make decisions is still the solution. I kind of gave up on that because resource-wise, it doesn't really make sense. So empowering decision makers throughout the whole chain with technology and giving them a different perspective. Timber cruising, you may put 1 point per 3 hectares, and you look at the stand from the perspective of a vole, and then you try to infer everything to the whole block, while with EFIs you can have a view every 20 meter by 20 meter, and you can leverage that. And then so what you do, you build on improving accuracy and finding ways to fix errors and reduce bias. So that's what really drives us, is the role we play in trying to make these things happen without relying on the old methods of the 1950s. So.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing when we think about that and look at what forestry contributes to the Canadian GDP, and then we look at how much investment is made in new technologies, and they're completely misaligned. And I like your point about, the stands, you're scaling that, because I still remember way back in my early days, the comment, oh, we assume a stand is all the same. And then I can't remember who said it to me, but they said, you know what, a stand is a homogeneous blob of heterogeneity. And that's always stuck in my head, because it's like, we just think it's homogeneous, but there's so much differences in there. So what does 10 years look out for you? You've been at this long enough. You've seen the world come and go with different technologies, the hype cycle, right? People excited about this, and then the boom multiple times. We won't necessarily flag those technologies, but thinking 10 years out, what does Gaetan see the digital forester look like in terms of their toolkits and whatnot?
Yeah, so I think in our neck of the woods, Eastern North America, I think because we're going to be relying still on a lot of natural forest, and I think the proportion of planted forest in up here will cap at some point for a variety of reasons. So I think 10 years from now, to bring the resolution that we get in understanding planted stands today, to bring that to the same level in mixed natural stands, I think would be a great advancement. Being able to work with optimizing growth rates, leveraging precision forest inventories, and make micro treatment. So shift the treatment on the fly as the machine progresses in the stand, and see in real time what you have to do here, which will be different than 30 meters from now, but do that on the fly, optimized under a bunch of constraints. Also, automation of the harvesters. So maybe Lidar sensors on the harvesting heads, with all these algorithms and better computers than we have today to do this. So we don't have to have a characterization campaign months or years before the harvest. We can do this on the fly. Of course, we need 5G networks everywhere, communication, super fast computers, all of that. But in the case of hardwood trees, once you're suggested which tree to cut, then you have a bucking recipe to optimize value of products. So 10 years from now, to have that technology in the cab of the harvesters would be great. But it has upstream from that is all the stuff we talked about all hour here. That all has to get in place. But
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Well, I often say, yeah, multiple pieces of the puzzle, you need them to kind of fall into place to realize some future state. And it's going to take everyone together, the NHRs, research institutions, private sector. Again, back to my get the subject matter experts around the table. You get those key people at the table, then you can do some amazing things. So thinking of people, Gaetan, who want to reach out and follow up, maybe they got projects, I'm sure as NHRI, you're open to new projects, new funding mechanisms, new collaborations per se. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you? Is it email? Is it the website, LinkedIn, social media? Feel free to share your credentials at this point.
Yeah, so the easiest ways would be by email. You can type in gaetan.pelletier@hardwoodsnb.ca, or go on our website, hardwoodsnb.ca, and then you can reach us from there. But we like to talk to people, so this is just to get the initial contact. But we'd like to talk to you and exchange. So these are the easiest way, and we encourage people to do that. And I want to end also, like, and I know this podcast of yours is not about that, but we have great relationships with firms like Limb Geomatics, and they are part of the mix, and it's really pleasant to be able to work, and you've helped us modify your tools and to do that. So it's not only about academia, it's not only about governments, and it's about a ton of different stakeholders that we get to do what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's partnerships that realize true collaboration there. So absolutely. So there you have it, folks. Yeah, you heard from Gaetan Pelletier. Gaetan, merci beaucoup for your time. It's always a pleasure speaking with you. I love hearing the stories. And as I said, hopefully, I'm not sure if it'll be February 2022 that we get to connect, but maybe not so far into the distant future. You're not a very far drive away. Well, by Forester's terms, you're only 8-hour drive for me heading out east. But I think you nailed it on the head in your final comments there, that you like to talk. Foresters like to talk. Foresters, relationships at the end of the day, people, boots on the ground, but nothing replaces just in-person communication. And those are where the real wins are realized. So thanks so much for joining. I appreciate you making the time for this. And I'm sure our listeners will enjoy this one and follow up with new research ideas to challenge you and your team. So thanks very much, Gaetan.
A pleasure, Gaetan.